we're pleased to have everyone who has joined us today for this webinar, and you should see my screen now, and hopefully you're seeing the webinar that you'd hope you signed up for. We're happy to take you through specifically what we're looking at today is about helping to manage your TM1, Cognos TM1 solutions and your Cognos TM1 models within your environment. And so it's about model management, it's about documentation, and it's really about this capability and solution called QUBEdocs, and how really across the world TM1 implementations have been using QUBEdocs for going on 4 years now, and has provided a tremendous efficiency for folks who are managing Cognos TM1 environments. And so we're happy to take you through this today. And today, here from Clear Insight on the call is myself, Ian Margerson. We have Bob Gill, a lead architect, and we have Kit Jan, who is in charge of services for Clear Insight, on the call with us as well today. And so we're happy to have each of these folks on the call. While I'm on this slide, just while I remember as well, and actually move to the agenda slide, but as we work our way through the agenda, please note on the right there is a chat window, and we want to make this as interactive as possible and answer your questions. We expect that most of you on the call are very familiar with TM1 and your TM1 environments, and so we're happy to answer your detailed questions around this capability and solution. So put your questions in the chat window as you think of them. As we go through, you can send them to the organizers, and then we're going to have a Q&A session at the end, and we will answer all your questions as we're able at the end. So we're going to go through some objectives. We're going to have a number of little anonymous audience polls, keep things interesting through our webinar that we'll be looking for you to respond to. And then we're going to go into an overview of QUBEdocs from the presentation here. And then we're going to turn it over to Bob, who will be giving you a live demonstration of QUBEdocs, which, of course, is probably the meat of what you'd like to be able to see today, but it's always good to give you the background and the context first, and then we'll go into Q&A and wrap up. Again, I think there's a number on the call who are current customers of ourselves, of Clear Insight. There may be some that you're not quite as familiar with us. We are an advanced IBM business partner specializing in, first of all, the Office of Finance and supporting the Office of Finance across the Cognos suite of tools, and also have extensive experience and background in the Clarity solution as well, all around budgeting, planning, and forecasting, including Cognos Disclosure Management. And so we've got clients around North America, and just there's a sample of some of the vertical industries that we work with. Our focus is on providing better outcomes, whether you're in the Office of Finance or whether you're responsible for corporate business intelligence and analytics. That is our business of taking the capacity you have and leveraging the items you see here on the slide: financial performance management, which is, of course, where Cognos TM1 sits, business intelligence around Cognos, financial disclosure management with Cognos Disclosure Management, and then, of course, into predictive with SPSS and risk and governance capabilities. And so if you are looking for support around any of these solutions or investigating, just have questions, what are you missing out on, what could be next, we're more than happy to touch base with you on the phone and provide whatever assistance we can in any and all of these areas. So our objectives for our webinar today, a couple of them here. First of all, together, is to validate the challenges associated with managing TM1 models, your individual TM1 applications, and various servers of TM1, and challenges associated with creating and maintaining documentation of your solution. And I know from all my background over the years, and no doubt you're in the same boat, that documentation in a technical environment is all but a bad word, and not something that folks are usually excited about doing. And so that's what's exciting about QUBEdocs and what we have to bring forward today. We're going to talk about the value of having accurate and up-to-date documentation. Then, of course, we'll take you into QUBEdocs and how that really simplifies the world we're talking about. And then, of course, for those of you that might not be as aware of Clear Insight, to introduce ourselves to you for, of course, QUBEdocs as a unique provider to QUBEdocs in the North American marketplace, and also for Cognos solutions. So our first audience poll, how much pleasure do you get from documenting your Cognos solutions? And we've got a few interesting ways in which you can pick that, and Kit is opening up the poll for you now, and we'll keep your responses anonymous, and we look forward to having you, what's your thought on how much pleasure do you get from documenting your Cognos solutions? And so we'll give you a little bit of time to get your answers in there, and if everybody who is on could just make a selection in the poll that's open, that would be great. And there may be some on the call, and maybe you are not, you don't have TM1 yet, and you're interested in the solution and what's TM1 in Cognos, and you're just on for that as well. You can, if that's the case, you can think about whatever solution you're using for business intelligence or financial planning, and look at it in that context as we look at these polls through the webinar. All right. We'll just close that up now, Kit. Appreciate that. And you guys should see on your screen there that you're of my ilk. You either want to call it sick that month, or you just don't do documentation. And when it is done, and we have to get it done, it's usually because there's an executive requirement, or in some cases for certain organizations, there's actually legal requirements or requirements to abide by certain rules and laws that documentation gets done. And so in those cases, you get the documentation done, but generally not that up to date. All right, so if we can close up the poll, thank you, Kit, and we'll just move on then. So we're all kind of, what can we do to help and aid our documentation? So for those of you that didn't call in sick that month, we'll open up this other poll. And so just curious on your documentation, where you would stand on your documentation for your solution and your TM1 models. So if that poll's open now, just make a selection there on where you think most accurately would dictate the documentation you have in your environment. Many customers we work with don't have some kind of minimal documentation that they might have done when it was first set up. Most don't have any at all, actually, and are kind of stuck in that way. So feel free to just answer that where you think you might fit in along that line. And again, if you're not using Cognos specifically right now, maybe you're on Clarity or something else, feel free. All right, Kit, that's great. If you can close that poll up. And so again, we're all kind of in the same boat where you have some documentation, or some of you don't have any documentation, but it's not a resource then clearly that you can go to dependably look at and understand what your models look like, what variations are in your models, or even use that documentation. Often when a business partner like ourselves begins to work with a new customer, we ask for the documentation. It's an easy way for us to understand what your environment is, and all too often that's not available. So just another reason for that documentation. Okay, if we can close that up. Kit, thank you very much. All right, so moving on, what is QUBEdocs then? So QUBEdocs really is it's a solution, it's a tool that gets installed within your TM1 environment. that has associated methods around that tool that when it's run against your TM1 environments, it's going to derive meaningful documentation and analytics for you around your TM1 solution. So ultimately, the objective is to deliver value into your environment. So it is a solution, a tool that does get installed and sits on your TM1 servers to drive the outcome value from QUBEdocs. So why is it important? Well, it's what we just went through really in our little questionnaire together. But there's the point about regulatory compliance that may be required in some of your situations. Assessing the impact of changes to the model, and this is one of the exciting things. It wasn't in the original versions of QUBEdocs, but is now here that Bob's going to be able to show you today. Very valuable for troubleshooting issues as they arise between environments or within environments. Comparing different environments. We have some clients who have multiple TM1 instances in different regions of their organization, and their objective is to maintain the exact same models and environments and TM1 implementations in every region. But each region has experts who can manage the model, and so this allows them to very easily run QUBEdocs and understand, are the models exact across the regions, or are there differences, and where do the differences lie? So that's another thing, and then just helps you administer your environment. So who benefits from QUBEdocs? Immediately you would think, well, it's the TM1 administrators and developers, of which we probably have most on the call, or you're probably in that vein. But please make sure that you are aware that it's not just the technical management of QUBEdocs, where that is very powerful. It's very useful for business users. Just like I mentioned, if we work with a new client, we're going to say, do you have documentation? And it helps us immediately understand your models. If you have new people who start to have to work with QUBEdocs and they're business users, there are elements of this documentation that you can just hand them or give them access to, and they then can immediately interpret from a business perspective what's the content of the TM1 environment, what dimensions, what elements within their financial systems or their reporting systems are part of the model. And so business users can do that, and will save you a lot of time from having to manually put something together or describe it to them. Some key benefits: it's user-centric. It's designed to be very easy to use, very easy to update, very easy to access, and provides you the insight across your models. And we're talking about TM1. So of course, what we really mean is that in the context of QUBEdocs, it's the TM1 underlying data structures, cubes, and models. So you could be using Cognos TM1, you could be using Cognos Enterprise, you could be using Cognos Express. Any of those solutions all apply for QUBEdocs. So any environment that is using TM1 cubes under the covers is what we mean, and that it works and integrates with. So it's going to provide you technical documentation that's auto-generated with data flows and relationships within your environment. It's going to provide you with rules and processes, commentary, your model organization and how that fits, and then the definitions of the individual elements within your models, including things like your cubes, dimensions, elements, attributes, processes, chores, your TI processes, your diagrams, custom tags, user-defined applications. It's going to dig into all of that within the model and provide it in an easy-to-use, accessible capability. This is just one example of a screen that you would see. What it actually does is it generates a complete HTML interlinked document. That, when that's generated, you specify where that HTML document lands when it's generated. The QUBEdocs software sits on your TM1 server, but this could be generated if it's only for yourself as an administrator. It could be generated to your own laptop. It could, however, be generated to a network server that has public access, and folks could then have a link from their desktop, so as soon as it's generated, it could be accessible to anybody within your environment that you want to have access to it. Or it could be put into a secure environment if that's what you prefer. People who then have access to the documentation, we're going to go through a lot of these things, but in addition to the documentation, just because that's the screen that's here now, there's a tremendous search function, and this search function is probably one of the most powerful elements of this. Is you can put in any word, any name. For example, if different people have changed and edited different parts of your model, you can search on that name, and you know here's where John has done everything within the model, etc. Search on dimensions, on anything you want, and search immediately brings that up, and so you know gives you rapid access into elements of your model. Your individual applications in the organization, so it starts higher at the application level and will give you that highest level of the applications, and then go down from there into the specifics of the models. When you're looking at your model, this is just a quick little view showing the cubes in a model and how the cubes interrelate to each other. And this will show, and Bob might show this, how if you have errors in your model, it's going to color code different things. You see one cube down there is in red, and that's going to indicate that there's a problem with that cube. There's something in the linked dimensions that aren't matching. There's a problem that's immediately visible and viewable within that environment. It's going to have a glossary built in there for all the elements. Again, useful for business users who are learning the solution. So before we jump to the next slide, our third of 4, so we have one more poll after this, after the demo. But what we'd like to know now is, current documentation aside, within your TM1 environment, how important is it for you to understand variances between your TM1 servers, whether it's between prod and dev, different regions like the example I gave before, or various servers, etc. How important is it for you to understand the differences between things? It doesn't matter, you don't care. It is something you'd like to know, or it's something you need to know in your ongoing management of your TM1 environment, and you have some way of doing it, or it is something that really would be of value in managing your TM1 environment, but it's very hard to do. So chime in there where you can. We'll give you another few seconds to pick which option works best for you. Okay, if you can just give me another second or two, try and pick a poll item there. Okay, great. I think everybody's kind of chimed in now. If we can close that poll, Kit. And so it looks like everybody there. Looks like everybody there is in the ballpark of it's something you need to know, but it's very hard and difficult to do. And really, if we're all honest, that is the thing. If I'm going to manage multiple models, I need to understand where they're different and how that's done. And there isn't anything inherently within TM1 that helps you to do that. So if we can close that poll up, Kit, that would be great. And so with that background, one of the tremendously powerful things within QUBEdocs is change management. And basically what you do, and Bob will show this, is you're able to point QUBEdocs at multiple TM1 servers, and it will automatically go out and search those servers and generate pages that demonstrate what the changes are and what's the differences in the two environments. So here's just an example, and it's, all that's highlighting in here are, you see in red things that have been removed, green things that have been added, and different between the two models. So tremendously powerful when you get into your day-to-day management of TM1. And so QUBEdocs is very important in helping with change management. Some of you may have upgraded to Cognos 10.2.2 and may have seen that within Cognos 10.2.2, IBM themselves have recognized the value of a lot of what QUBEdocs provides. And so they've started to give a few things in there, but it pales in comparison to what QUBEdocs does for you in this world. So really what 10.2.2 has is simply data flow diagrams of links between the cubes, which is such a small subset of what QUBEdocs is. But I wanted to highlight that for you in case you thought, oh, you know, I think TM1 has something like this. Well, that's what it is, and really it's just showing you the link between the cubes, missing all of the search, the change management, the you name it, that we've gone through. QUBEdocs is up to version 2.8 with a lot of new things added. The change capability, change documentation, that came in a version or two ago. Probably one of the most unique and largest additions to 2.8 over the previous version was it now supports TM1 on the cloud. So if you have the cloud version of TM1 or are thinking of going there, QUBEdocs supports that and allows you through FTPS connections to hit those TM1 cloud instances and do your documentation and change management there as well. All right, enough of me talking, and I'm happy to now turn it over to Bob Gill, who will kind of walk you through what he's going to do for the demo and show you things live. Just before as Bob gets ready, I want to remind you to put your questions into the chat window, and we look forward to answering those at the end. Thanks, and I'll turn it over to Bob.
Great, thanks, Ian. I think that was a great overview on what we can do with QUBEdocs, and I think to kind of give it a little more context, I thought of a little scenario we'll play through, because we want to. QUBEdocs does a great job of giving you an overview of cube dimensions and processes. You can even group them into applications to kind of give you a little bit of an idea of these cubes and dimensions and processes relate to maybe your revenue planning or your expense planning or whatever type of solution has a business context there. And it will also include the data flows and the rules and processes like Ian's kind of gone through already, as well as comments and giving you kind of HTML formatting with change detection. So we'll go through all this stuff. But the scenario I want to work through, and some of you may have had this before, is let's say you have a CFO that walks over your desk one morning and says, the revenue numbers are wrong and you need to fix this right now. So maybe you don't know what revenue is. Maybe you don't even know if revenue is a cube or a TI, or maybe this is your first day on the job and you don't even know much about TM1 at all. So it can kind of be a scary experience when someone is standing at your desk saying you need to fix this right now, and the next question is, well, what do you do? Well, QUBEdocs is going to be very helpful with this kind of thing, because the first thing you can do is we can generate the documentation. Then we can figure out, well, what does revenue, there is a revenue cube, but what does it do? Were there any changes recently? And what other stuff can we figure out from this? So as we're going through the demo here, keep in your mind that, imagine this is your first day on the job. You're trying to fix something that's got to get fixed right now. It's a stressful situation, and you're kind of learning as you go here, learning on your feet. So first time you log into the server here, this is just a standard remote desktop. QUBEdocs is already there, so it's just a thick client application, and you can open up and run. It'll come up, and it's a fairly simple interface, and just say, give it a connection. You can edit these and say, okay, well, that's the name of it, where the configuration file lives, the database directory, and the output, credentials if necessary. You test all that. And then you say, well, where do I want it to live? You just generate that documentation. So to Ian's point about different environments, what I tend to do is that when I'm using QUBEdocs, I'll only install QUBEdocs on my development server, and then I'll always run it against dev, prod, and I'll generate a difference between the two. So If I wanted to run this, I can run this right now. So it's looking at my dev instance. I'm going to put the details there, hit generate. Do I want to overwrite the stuff that's there? Sure, go for it. So now it's going to go through and it's going to read all of the objects that are on the server right now, the dimensions, the cubes, the TIs, the chores. It's going to look at, it actually goes even down to subsets, dimension elements to see if there's been changes. There's a granularity you can have on this to say, well, I want to know if a subset changes. Show me that. So you get that level of granularity, and there you go. So that's all done. So at this point, let's imagine I don't know anything about, all I know is that revenue is not right. So what is revenue? So I come here into QUBEdocs, and I see this is just standard browser. And Ian also mentioned the powerful search that's here. So there's a navigation on the left. I'll go over that in a moment, but let's just say I know nothing more than revenue. That's all I know. Boom. I type in revenue. I get any reference to revenue across my processes, my rules, my cubes. And along the top, it even categorizes them for us. So I can see, oh, there's 3 cubes that reference revenue. So let's go into that. Okay, well, here's my cubes. There's a reference in the comment. There's a reference in the cube name. Okay, that's interesting. Here's my, there's a revenue cube. So if I click on my revenue cube, okay, so here we are in 2 clicks. Maybe I typed in the word revenue. I typed in the word revenue. I clicked on cubes. I clicked on revenue. So I entered one term. I did 2 clicks, and now I'm looking at all the detail around the whole revenue cube that I may or may not have known even existed. I get a list of all the dimensions that are here. I can get more detail into that by just clicking on the items. If I keep scrolling down, what's more important to me right now, especially from a troubleshooting perspective, is what are the data flows? So I know that this number could be wrong. Well, where does it go? Where does it come from, or where does it go? So I can see very clearly, okay, there's some data that comes from a file. There's some that comes from another cube called spread methods, and then that gets pushed into an income statement, and pcube name is probably a parameterized piece. So I get some insight into what's going on within this thing. And I also see that there's references to, there's self-references within the cube. So going down a little bit further, okay, I see that there's 4 TI processes here that are used, what the data, what the sources are, and sources are, this one is from itself, and the rules. So this is a nicely formatted list of all of the rules that exist in that cube. And maybe I don't want to use the formatting, maybe I just like it the way it is. Okay, so here's unformatted. If I want to copy and paste it in there. So this gives me, I know there's gross margin, there's unit price, there's unit cost, a lot of things you'd expect to see in a revenue cube. So this gives me a little bit more context around the revenue piece, and I'm just going to recap. So all we did is we opened up QUBEdocs, we generated our documentation, we're reviewing the documentation, and now we know there's a revenue cube, this is the data flows around it, what dimensions it has, and we've already answered some of the questions around giving us that context around what we need to do to troubleshoot. It's given us a very good place to start. Now I'm going to digress for a moment here and let's talk about the navigation on the left. So at the very top level, you get your application documentation, which is those groups I mentioned. So if you want to group a set of cubes into one application, QUBEdocs is really nice about saying, okay, well that's going to group these 6 cubes together, anything related to those 6 cubes, that's your revenue solution. Or anything related to these 7 cubes, that's your capital solution. If you can look at it from an application perspective, so here I've got financial planning. So if I click on financial planning as one of my applications, these are all the cubes related to financial planning. Expanding the navigation on the left, you still see application documentation. Financial planning is where we are right now. Model documentation. So if I go into model documentation, I see a list of cubes. This can be a long list of cubes, as you can imagine. But all the cubes are there for what we're looking for. Let's say I want to look at my revenue cube this way. So I can find my revenue cube here. Within the revenue cube, I get the dimensions that are there. You write down even to the subsets. So I can tell what's the default subset in this particular dimension. So these are the subset. These are the dimension subsets that are there right now, even if there's an expression around them. So that can be very handy for troubleshooting. And as you can imagine, if I'm looking at a dimension here, if I click on the organization dimension within this cube, it tells me specifically that dimension. Where is it used? You know, is it does it have any TI related to it? So it does. So here's a TI where it's going to load from some CSV file. There's a TI called update organization, which updates the dimension. So it gives me a nice visual data flow on what that thing is, and links exactly to that process if I need to investigate it. So from a troubleshooting perspective, this can be very, very handy because you're not connecting to a live server where you're opening up rules files and possibly opening up cube views that may or may not be affecting data. This is disconnected from the data right now. So this investigation has zero risk. But again, let's walk through the rest of the navigation. So we talked about cubes. That's our cubes folder. Dimensions kind of glazed over that. This is just a listing of all the stuff by all the dimensions that are available. Processes, you can probably imagine, has a list of all the processes in the process solution. And chores. So chores are the things that are scheduled to run up. Can either be run as a set, ad hoc, or can be scheduled to run as a group. Also, and this is new in, I think it's 2.8, they have quality documentation. So this is what Ian alluded to before, is it will give you some detail on, okay, well, what's documented and what's not. Okay, there's 5 cubes in there that aren't documented right now. Okay, that's interesting. I wonder if those are new, maybe they're just dev copies that don't need to be, but it gives you some insight into what has changed. And not only what has changed, but what has not been documented. What else I want to show here? So integrity checks. So here, which cubes are not used in any applications? These cubes are in there, but they're not used in any application. Maybe they're orphans. Maybe I can delete them, clean up a bit. Which dimensions are not used in any cubes? That seems like a really nice one to know. Oh, all these dimensions are sitting on my server and they're not being used in any cube. Maybe it's a good opportunity to clean that stuff up. Now, if I go back to my model documentation, pardon me, and the application documentation, this is a little financial planning. So now we've kind of gone down to the bottom pieces, and I want to come back up to the higher level. So this is an application is a grouping of cubes, dimensions, and processes. Here I get my data flow on all the cubes that are involved. Some more application details around what these things are in business terms. And this can be maintained by users. It doesn't need to be, it can be a technical person going in and entering this stuff, but it can also be a business owner going through and making sure that these business terms are accurate. The listing of all the cubes and the dimensions. And then what I like, this is very handy, is this cube and dimensions matrix. So this gives me a quick little grid of all of the cubes and all of the dimensions used within this application. So when we just talk about an application being a group of cubes, dimensions, and processes that make up our financial planning piece, this is how they interact. Maybe if I look at this, I see that my capital list, capital and asset types are using my capital cube. That makes sense. But there's no account. That's interesting. Maybe that surface is something that I missed. Maybe it needs to have a count there to be consistent with some of my income statement items. So it's a different view to help you figure out, well, what's our next step. And the nice thing about this is you don't need to wait for someone to go through and build all this stuff. It's not a manual process. This is something that can be scheduled or run ad hoc, and it's automatically generated. So let's see. So now we're trying to figure out, what is revenue? Okay, well, I think now we've kind of identified that we've got a good revenue cube here. I suspect this is where our issue is. If I look at my revenue cube here, I get the detail we kind of mentioned. I'm going to think that this is where my issue is, but I don't really know. Let's assume I really don't know if it's there at all. I go back to QUBEdocs. Now, what if I want to compare? So I want to compare versions here. So by comparing my versions, I can select, well, which one do I want to have as my baseline? Well, let's say production is my baseline. Actually, let's use, yeah. So let's say I want to compare these. I'm going to use number 9 as my baseline and number 7 as my revised. So this, when I generate this, it's going to go through and just compare those two. These could be on different servers. They could be on the same server with different names. They could just be text. They could just be text. It could be that these are files that I copied off a server and put in some folder on a test box, just so I can do the comparison offline. But this will go through and it'll compare every object to give me a listing of what's different. So let's look at what that looks like. So this is a Cube changes report here. Actually, at the top level, still the same, but there's a change documentation piece. This is what I think is very, very powerful, especially if you're managing, dev test production environments and traditional change control. So you can come in here and it'll tell you very quickly, okay, well, I've got 2 cubes that have come up with changes. There's no additions and no omissions. So additions would be, these are new cubes that maybe existed are revised but did not exist in the baseline, and omissions are the reverse. So maybe they exist in production, but they can be deprecated. So this helps us with the cleanup effort as well, not just troubleshoot. So here I see, when I look at modifications, there's 2 cubes that appear to be modified, and lo and behold, our revenue cube is listed there. If I scroll down a bit, I'll see here's my reference to my revenue cube. The following changes relate to the revenue cube, cube properties and relationships. It does a timestamp. So even if someone just kind of came in and just opened it up and mistakenly hit save, we'll know. We won't necessarily know who, but we'll know that there was some kind of a change there. And even if here I'm looking at the specific rule file of before and after. And here we go. So this section I'm highlighting on the right shows that it picked up my last change that I made here. And I'm wondering, does QUBEdocs find this small change? Like if you look at that number and you're eyeballing this, can you really tell that I changed it from 100 to 1,000? That's a really easy thing to miss. But QUBEdocs will go through it line by line, comparing the 2 pieces there, and it'll surface that this was a change between the 2 environments. It'll highlight it'll highlight right there. So now I know, okay, there was a change. Our definition of our definition of gross margin changed. Could that be what the error is? So now, in just a couple of minutes, I've been able to identify that I've been able to figure out, well, what is revenue in the context of TM1 objects? Have there been any changes recently? Yes, there have. Okay, well, what are those changes? Okay, this is exactly what those changes are. Now, could that be related to what our issue is? In this case, it is. You don't need to multiply it by 1,000. That's just wrong. So the simple fix is to take out the 0 and put it back the way it was. But to get to that point of seeing, okay, there's only one character that's been added to one particular rule file across this entire server, that can be a really daunting task to find that kind of thing. So just need a moment here to get the next bit ready. Now, just a reminder to folks, as I'm going through stuff, please put questions into the chat. I don't mind stopping and going into more detail in different pieces. There is a lot here for us to kind of talk through. So I want this to be as interactive as possible. So we've gone through the QUBEdocs TI. Just a moment. Okay, so far we've gone through we generated documentation, we've done a comparison of it, we've done searching for our revenue to find out a little bit more context on what that is. We've been able to look at the detail of our revenue cube to find out exactly, exactly what that means within the context here. Compare versions. See, QUBEdocs does find the changes, the quality checks. Again, the quality documentation here will give you some insight into, and this can be stuff that not only just from a housekeeping to keep things clean, but also from a performance piece. If you've got cubes that are sitting there and they're not part of if they've got dimensions sitting there and not part of any cubes, you clean those out, and that could help you get some more memory back on your server. Now, so to this point, we're all in HTML. It's all generated documentation for QUBEdocs, and for business users can see and do all this stuff. Now, the next part I want to show you is the techie stuff, and this is what I think is really cool. As you can imagine, where does QUBEdocs save all of its data? Well, in a cube. So everything that you see, all the data that QUBEdocs finds, it puts it back into its own cubes within the server. So if there's stuff that you want to document, or you want to update, or you want to have some kind of a view onto, you have access to everything. This is certainly not a closed book type of thing. You can go in and pull out any piece you want, or rule in any piece you want. In this case, we're looking at a cube that says, well, what are the owners and what are the different subset users of the different piece. So if we're looking at our definitions, QUBEdocs has done some really neat stuff in here. If you're using the Cube Viewer to go through and do all your management, that's perfectly fine. There's subsets and all these items here to say, well, how would we do this here? Well, first thing we're going to update our document definitions. So I see I've got definitions in here. These can be ruled in, they can be set by a user, put a web sheet on top of it, whatever you want to do. You're going to update anything else you may have in there. So there could be other references to document links or SharePoint pieces, or anything else you want to include as part of this documentation that gets generated every time. And we've got to figure out which cubes are in which applications. So it's a very simple grid to let you do that. Okay, my asset life, that's part of my revenue. So just make that yes. So what I want to showcase here is that all of the management of QUBEdocs is TM1. It's the same stuff. It's nothing fancy. There's no additional data store hiding somewhere. It's all just QUBEdocs. So I see a question here, can the tool help us identify performance bottlenecks, inefficient processes, and other similar weak points? That's a good question. So some of the pieces here in the quality checks can help with that, invalid objects and such. And also, I think with the data flows, so let's look at an example of a data flow. So you'll see data flows here. This is fairly linear. So this is going to be a pretty clear one to see. Probably income statement will be a little more complicated. So you see something like that. Visually, if I look at that one there and I see, okay, well, there's a lot of stuff going on in the income statement, I wonder if that's going to be a performance challenge. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But visually, that's something that leads me to wonder, and I could investigate that further. It also gives me some detail around how are these things linked. So you'll see here, all these green, this is all ruled in. So if I'm looking at this and I see, my income statement report is quite slow right now, and my income statement cube has a lot of data that's ruled in right now. Well, maybe there's some stuff that's looking at income statement, we should be looking at income statement reporting. I click on income statement reporting, and I see right away that they're still using rules here. Maybe I should change that to a TI. So from an architecture perspective, you're able to navigate these things and see at an architecture level what is flowing into where. You don't need to go in and see, okay, well, on the prologue tab of this particular TI, there's a cell get, and then there's a cell put. You're much more at the architectural stage. You get that higher level view. What else can I show you? So we've looked at, and this is the QUBEdocs UI. I can manage my versions here if I want to get rid of old model data I'm storing here. But the big piece is doing the comparison, picking to maybe a dev and a test, or as Ian mentioned, different regions, comparing the two. And if we look at the change piece, we get that. Let's look at one particular TI. So for a particular TI, you get data source comments, you get prologue comments, you can get your data flow from within the TI, the process detail. You're actually getting the detail right into the different tabs, your prologue, metadata, data, and epilogue tab. So that can be very powerful here. So again, for a glossary. The glossary is also helpful from a business perspective, as these are all terms that are defined within the context of the business application. So if I'm not sure what to call something, or maybe I'm looking at it through this way, and I want to find what's revenue. So I can come into my glossary. Let's go down to revenue. Let's see, do we have anything here called revenue? Oh, we do. Okay, well, in the context of this application, revenue is a Q. Maybe and it's also dimension here as well. So if I want to navigate from the glossary perspective, that's perfectly fine. And again, it's all HTML linked, so I can go to my revenue dimension and my revenue Q just as easily. So hopefully, I've shown you that if the CFO shows up at your desk one morning and he says, okay, the revenue is incorrect, I need you to fix this right now. QUBEdocs is something that you can generate the documentation very quickly. You can do a comparison against different environments or even different versions on the same server. Get the context of what these things mean right now, and also get very quickly call out if there's any changes between two pieces. And from that point forward, you can still look at the quality pieces to see, well, what can be improved for performance and such. Performance is a tough one. I think there's a lot of things that can hurt performance. But I think that's where, if folks are having performance challenges, I think that's where we can definitely help you with that kind of stuff. I would say, first thing to check is a lot of the feeders. There's probably a lot of feeders that are over or underfed, more likely overfed. By tuning the feeders quite a bit, you can reduce the taxing on the number of resources required. So I think with that, Ian, I'll throw it back to you there, and we can go into the Q&A piece, and how we go do that.
All right. Terrific. Thanks, Bob. I'll just take control back here. And so appreciate that, Bob. That was excellent, taking us through that extensive demo, and hopefully that was of value to everyone on the call to be able to see that. Now that you've seen QUBEdocs, we'd love to get your perspective on things, and Kit's going to open up another poll here. Which of the following do you see as the top QUBEdocs benefits? Unlike the other ones where you could pick only one item, here you can pick multiple items. So from what you've seen, is it of great value for eliminating manual tasks of documenting, satisfying corporate documentation requirements, simplified model corrections and enhancements, compare TM1 instances, or make TM1 administrators and users happy, which we all like to have happy administrators. So if you could take a look at that poll and just click on a few of the items on there, that would be great. And we'll just give you a second to think about that and fill that in. All right, just watching the clock here now, so maybe we can close that up. Kit, so thank you for your answers, and great to see everybody. Everybody sees the value in all of those, and I guess the one that would be maybe not so obvious would be whether or not you have specific corporate documentation requirements or not, or whether it's to help folks. So that may or may not be of value there, but appreciate your answers there. That's great. And hopefully coming out of the webinar you were able to see that. Now, for Q&A time, I know that Bob jumped on a couple of the questions there already, so I'm not sure if there is any questions left to be had. Kit, maybe you can just unmute and let us know. Is there any additional questions that need answered?
Unmuted.
There are no additional questions at this point in time.
All right. Good. Thanks so much. Well, we are watching the top of the hour. So just this slide and one more with our contact information, but really now that you've seen QUBEdocs, don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to give you specific pricing for your environment on QUBEdocs. There's pricing for Cognos Express, and then within the TM1 environments, pricing depending on the size of your TM1 environment, and that's easily done. And I'm happy to provide that to you. A specific QUBEdocs demo for yourselves and or a trial within your environment, we're able to provide you with a trial license for your environment, if that's something that you'd like to do. And then, of course, as advanced IBM partners, we're experts in supporting Cognos TM1 environments in upgrades, in new templates, reports, etc. We're happy to provide you and be of service to you for any of those items there. So as far as reaching out, you can reach out to myself, ian.margerison@clearinsight.ca. If you don't remember all that, you can get me at info@clearinsight.ca. And happy to take your calls directly at that number. And would encourage you to follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn. We have a YouTube channel as well, where we post YouTube videos, including this recorded webinar will probably be up on YouTube in a little bit as well. So thank you very much for that, and would love to hear from each of you with everything. So with that, we will close out the webinar. We appreciate your time. Bob, thanks for your clear demos, and Kit for your administration through the process. And we look forward to talking to you in the near future. All the best, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much.